And the federal program works in a similar way, it's a similar kind of partnership to pay. These programs, Section 8, MRVP, other state programs, have been around long enough that there has been a lot of rigorous research over the years about their impacts, and they have a legion of well-known benefits. Poverty alleviation. These vouchers act a lot like cash. So if you have a voucher, you don't have to spend other cash on rent. You can use that cash for other things, investing in your family and their education and better food, things like that. Homelessness reduction, this one pretty straightforward. If the state is providing you a voucher to make it easier to find a place to live, you're more likely to find a place to live. Better health outcomes, a lot of these are tied to the stress that comes from the uncertainty of whether you'll be able to afford your rent, stay in one place. So providing this guarantee through the voucher system improves health outcomes, largely through that channel. Stability in the affordable housing market, this is something I'm going to come back to a couple of times. By offering vouchers to renters with lower incomes, you're providing a guarantee to landlords that they're going to get paid, right? Even if these people, you're a family, you are struggling with unstable income, if you're in this program, you can tell your landlord, your landlord knows you're going to be able to pay rent, right? So it creates an incentive for building, for offering space to people in the program. And then there's increased mobility. So a lot of these not all, but some of these voucher programs do allow you to take your voucher and move around the state to different places. So this enables families to make a decision about whether they want to be in a different school district or whether they love their community and want to stay where they are. But the current system has some pretty serious limitations. The biggest of them is scarcity. The majority of people who are eligible for MRVP in Massachusetts do not get it. Right? This is a very different setup than most government assistance programs, or many government assistance programs. With Medicaid, we don't say, are you eligible, and then say, oh, you're eligible, but we don't have enough slots for you. With Social Security, we don't say, are you eligible? Yes, but we don't have enough money for you. But we do that with housing assistance, we do that with MRVP. Yes, there are plenty of people who are eligible, but we've not allocated the money for you. So you can't get it. And most people who are eligible cannot. This is the biggest problem. Landlord discrimination is another issue. I said before that there's some benefits to the stability of rental payments that come to the system, but so long as it's a small number of people and landlords can find other people to rent, they may worry about state intervention or late payments, things like that. And so there's well-known landlord discrimination. Organizational inefficiency. So currently the system in Massachusetts is overseen by over 100 local and regional agencies. That creates a lot of duplication of effort, a lot of fragmentation of information, and it makes it hard to both to understand the system and to navigate the system. It's also connected to the incomplete data collection. There's a lot we don't really know about who gets a voucher in Massachusetts, how long they keep their vouchers, because the program is overseen by so many disparate agencies. So, as Chris mentioned, we were inspired by this call for a universal program to ask, well, if we did make MRVP more like Medicaid and we just said, oh, if you're eligible, you get it, not if you're eligible, we'll check and see if we have a slot for you, what would change? How much would it cost and what would change? So making it eligible to all who qualify, the obvious thing it does is it spreads the benefits to many more seniors, families, and individuals of very low income. So all those benefits we just talked about, poverty alleviation, homelessness reduction, healthcare improvements, those things are available now to everyone who's eligible, and not just a small subset of people. You eliminate the unfairness of the lottery. You reduce landlord discrimination. The way you reduce landlord discrimination is because it becomes much too expensive to discriminate. You can discriminate against a small number of people without affecting your bottom line. You cannot discriminate against hundreds of thousands of people. Or if you do, there'll be somebody else who's happy to provide housing for those people. So you create a market because you have enough people in the program that you can't avoid. And then you create new incentives to construct housing for voucher holders. Again, there's a huge market of people with vouchers. And developers will see it, and they can step in and provide housing knowing that they have this guaranteed backstop of support from the state. And then we can start looking at who would benefit. So here's where our researchers kind of start digging into the data. We found that there are approximately 585,000 households in Massachusetts that meet the current eligibility criteria for MRVP. That means they earn less than 80% of the median income in their area. They do not have large assets. They do not own a home. They meet other other criteria. So offering vouchers to all of these families would advance core priorities like racial justice, which I'll talk about on the next slide, economic justice. So I mentioned that the cutoff is 80%. If you're below 80% of the area median income, you are eligible under these criteria. But actually, half of people who would be eligible are under 30% of area median income. Right? There's a huge group of people at much lower down who are extremely low income. And not only is that half of the people, it would be about 70% of the dollars, because the size of the voucher depends on your ability to pay. So the less you earn, the more the state will contribute to your housing needs, and that means more money flowing down to those with extremely low incomes. Regional fairness. This is an issue that affects every part of the state. There are people eligible for this program in every part of the state. We have a map in the report showing that. Caring for seniors. So one thing we recognized doing the report is that a universal program would disproportionately help seniors living alone. Among all households, one-person households that would be eligible for this program, the median age of people in those households is 60. Right? That means half of people in these one-person households who are eligible are older than 60 years old. Compare that to the typical age of people in a three-person household who would be eligible. That's about 39. And so it would have really strong effects for seniors living alone. I mentioned I'd come back to racial justice. So the chart you're looking at the right is the share of all households in the state that would be eligible for this, not just for universal MRVP, not just share of all renters, share of all households. So it's about half of all Black households in the state that would be eligible for universal MRVP, over half of all Hispanic households. So if you guarantee vouchers for everyone, you would dramatically ease the cost burden for renters of color, creating new opportunities to invest in other priorities like businesses, family needs, things like that. All right, so those are the benefits, the costs. We wanted to really break this down. So here's how we did it. We identified all households that would be eligible. As I said, it's about 585,000 households. We adjust to account for households already served by the current array of rental programs. So this is not just MRVP, but Section 8, state public housing, federal public housing, submarket housing. All of those programs serve about 250,000 people in the state. That leaves about 335,000 unserved. And we further adjust for incomplete participation in churn. So while it might be nice to hope that you would have 100% of eligible people participate in the program, no government program has that kind of participation rate. The best government programs have to have participation rates about 85%. Our SNAP has about an 85% rate, and some of the programs have much lower participation rates. There's also a churn issue. There will always be people kind of moving in, their incomes fall below the threshold, it will take them a while to find a place. There will be people who are moving out of the program, maybe they get a better job, they have a new opportunity. So when you combine these, so those people won't always be using their vouchers. So when you combine the participation rates and the churn rates, we find that at any time a universal program would have to be providing about 240,000 vouchers. Right? So it'd be helping about 240,000 families. Keep going here. Then we can calculate the average cost for new vouchers based on what we know about current voucher costs, but also about the distribution of income. So we have detailed information about household incomes across Massachusetts. We can compare that to area rents, and we find, I mean, it's a nice round number, which is kind of, makes it seem like it might have been an easy calculation. I can assure you it was not an easy calculation, even though we ended up with a nice round number. But about $1,000 a month in voucher costs, plus another $100 a month in administrative costs, which we calculated from Section 8 reimbursement rates, and also general administrative costs of large government programs, which run about 10%. So you bring this all together, we conclude that a universal rental assistance program in Massachusetts could help 240,000 new households at an annual cost of $3.2 billion. There are risks and challenges that come with a change like this. So we'd have to really attentive to, for one thing, keeping rents in check. If tomorrow we flipped a switch and provided rental vouchers to everyone, it would dramatically, everyone who's eligible, dramatically increase demand for housing. And you might ask why, because you might think people just move between, they have a house, they want a new house, they want a better rent, whatever it is. But for one thing, there's a homeless population, people who are unhoused, and they would be looking for housing. But also there would be new household formation. Right? There are people who are doubling up. people who are living with family members that would want to live independently, they'd be able to live independently. So you would see a big increase in demand. And increase in demand without increase in supply of housing would risks anyway driving up rent. Ensuring access to jobs and opportunities is another thing. When you're in this program, it has the kind of slight but not non-trivial effect of making it less desirable to get a raise, for instance, because you have to pay 30 cents of every dollar that you earn towards your rent. So if you get a $1 raise, you're actually getting 70 cents, and you know that 30 of those cents are going right to the voucher. That's still 70 more cents, so it's not that there's not there, but there's some, you just have to be attentive to it and make sure you design it in a thoughtful way. And then minimizing competition with federal programs. That just means we get a large subsidy from the federal government, essentially through the Section 8 program. Right? They're paying for about 150,000 vouchers. If we made a universal MRVP in Massachusetts much, much more generous than the federal program, nobody would want to be in the federal program, and we would lose the value of all those vouchers. Again, these are not insuperable challenges, but if you're pushing for a transformative new agenda, you want to make sure that you confront the challenges head on and you find solutions to them. A change of the scale will require thoughtful preparation, a gradual phase, and iterative process. So I mentioned, flipping the switch creates or exacerbates some of these challenges, whereas a gradual phasing is one way to start thinking about how to address them. So one way would be to kind of move in phases. We're talking about 240,000 new vouchers. You could do 25,000 new vouchers a year for 10 years. And or one thing, or you could take a population and say, we really want to start with, some group that's been historically discriminated against the housing market and build from there. And either of these would allow you to grow supply at the same time to avoid rent issues, improve the organization and codification. So this is the next bit. It would be very hard to do this without reorganizing and codifying MRVP. Right? MRVP, the rules of MRVP get set through the budget cycle every year rather than being part of the general laws. They really would have to be integrated into the general laws for this to be a workable long-term program. And probably there need to be some kind of centralization of authority over the system rather than the distributed responsibility of 100 different groups around the state, both so we understand what's going on and to ensure that people have maximal access to mobility and there isn't duplication of effort and cost. And I mentioned new construction. Moving in phases allows for new construction. One of the big benefits, though, of taking an approach like universal rental assistance is that it's not antithetical to new construction in a way that some other approaches to making housing affordable can be. In fact, it provides a huge new market for developers, of people who will reliably be able to afford their rents because they know that they are in this government program. I see Chris checking his watch, was going to be glad that was my last slide. And I'm not taking questions either, is my understanding, not right now. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Good eye, Evan. So next up, I've already introduced him, but I want to call him up Senator John Keenan.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's great to be here. I was on my ride over today, a couple things hit me. One was the traffic was a mess, and when I checked my transit app versus what it would take in time to drive here, driving won. But transportation, it highlighted transportation is a pretty big issue around here, and I get stuck behind probably 3 or 4 school buses on the way here, reinforcing the idea of education. And recently, we have committed substantial funds through the ballot initiative and through the legislature for transportation and for education. And I think if you look at what's necessary for the Commonwealth to succeed, and you look at it as a multi-leg stool, certainly education, certainly transportation, and just as importantly, housing. And while we have committed substantial resources through the ballot initiative to education and to transportation, I think what we're learning here today, not really anything new to us, but what we're seeing in some rather stark numbers, is how important housing is to the success of the economy of the Commonwealth. So it's great to be here, despite the issues with traffic and education this morning, being stuck behind buses. We heard some numbers so far today, and we heard about the program reaching its peak back in 1990, when about 20,000 households were served. So I took a look through the budgets to go back to 1990. It was a little difficult to trace, but back then it was included in the budget as Chapter 707. And in 1990, the line item was funded at about $4 million. And if you bring that forward, adjusting it for inflation, that would be about $8 million today. It served about 20,000 households back then, and now we're serving about 10,000, perhaps a little less than 10,000. I took a look at the numbers from fiscal year 2013 as well, and back then we were funding the program at about $42 million, and we know now in FY23 we're funding the program at $154 million. So when you go either from 1990 or from 2013 to the present, and you look at the dramatic increase in funding, the logical conclusion would be we must be serving so many more households, but we're serving about half as many. So it prompts a couple observations. One is that while the funding has increased dramatically, and the number of households has remained significantly below peak, it highlights the challenges that we have when you have rent increases such as we have seen, and you match that with very, very low, stagnant wage increases over all those years. It results in those at the bottom of the income ladder being left further and further behind. The affordability gap when it comes to rent has just grown enormously, whether you look at the last 32 years or the last 10 years. So the legislature has understood that and has tried to respond as best as possible. And I think we're having some success. This year in the budget, we were able, through the budget process, from the time that the budget was initially introduced by the governor, up until the time that it came out of conference committee and went to the governor's desk and was ultimately signed, we were able to increase the MRVP line by about $24 million. A substantial increase, but as we've seen, clearly not enough. Also, we tried and were successful in the budget to make sure that those at the 30% level, those that are really struggling, that when it comes time to calculate what they'll be responsible for in terms of rent, that we include utilities in that. And we think that was a big step forward. But we still recognize that it's not enough. The second observation is that the Commonwealth continues to succeed in a lot of ways. We are drawing people from our colleges and our universities and from other parts of the country here because of some of our industries. Bio, life sciences, our healthcare industry, our financial services industry. The list, thankfully, is relatively long. But in that process, as we attract those higher wage earners, we know that they put an enormous strain on our housing market. They eat up so much of the housing that's available. The competition is really great. And so when you look at the success of parts of our economy, and you match that with now the cost of inflation, and you factor in the cost of increasing utilities, again, it highlights that very wide gap between those that can afford housing here in the Commonwealth and those that can't. And we know that those that can't, 80% of median and below, particularly those at 30% of area median, are really struggling. So what's next for us? I think all of that and what we've learned today highlights that there is a great need to make sure that we provide one of the core essentials to succeeding here in the Commonwealth. We do it with transportation, we're doing it with education, we now have to turn our sights on housing. And that means doing what we did for them and a little bit more. One, finding the resources. $3.2 billion, I think was the number, is a substantial number. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but in the shorter term, we can codify this program. We can make it so that it's not subject to the whims of the budget process every year, so that we do not have to file amendments and go through that complicated amendment process to try and make sure that the resources necessary are allocated for this line item. We can do that. And then we can make a commitment to start finding ways to fund the essential need for housing. I can tell you that one of the things that we have to focus on as well, and it's been presented, is streamlining that process. So if we are able to codify it, if we are able to start funding it, we then have to make it accessible, and make it accessible in as easy a manner as possible. That's streamlining the process. So those are the things that we're looking at in the legislature. Those are the challenges we face. And I just want to thank all of you for all of the work that you do for providing us the information, the support, the encouragement, and most importantly, highlighting the needs of the people that you serve. So thank you for doing that. We're going to keep at it, and we look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Our next speaker is Michelle White from Homes for Families.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. Homes for Families advocates for families in shelters across the Commonwealth. These are families who are experiencing homelessness. This population of people are made up of some of the most vulnerable people, and that's women and children. Women and children who are often a part of the underrepresented, underserved population in our Commonwealth and in our nation overall, living below the line of poverty. I stand here today as a member of that population, the class of underserved and underrepresented families. Homes for Families educated me. They educated me on how to advocate for policy change. Policy change that will improve the lives of the population, of the people, of the families who are less fortunate and extremely vulnerable. I found a community of advocacy in Homes for Families, and its partnership with many nonprofit and other social service entities. I became empowered to use my voice and my experience living below the line of poverty to promote change through policy. Homes for Families provide space for state agencies, service providers, advocates, families, and other community stakeholders to collaborate and envision a state like Massachusetts without a homeless population. I became a CAT member at Homes for Families. And you might ask, what is a CAT? A CAT stands for a Consumer Advocacy Team. And in the audience today, there are a lot of us here today because we are members. We are a team of consumers who advocate. We advocate for positive policy change in MRVP. My hope is for everyone to have their basic needs met so that their quality of life may be improved. Having stable housing, affordable housing, living in a healthy community so that everyone can thrive is where MRVP can be a foundation for equity in housing. I would hope for everyone to eventually live rooted in a community where they can afford it, where their community will then serve as a network that will encourage them to succeed and form a network that provides services, wraparound services, services in multiple capacity along with being housed. I choose hope. Why do I choose hope? Because I hold on to these hopes, because without housing, my hopes are only dreams, daydreams at best. And with housing, my hopes are the possibilities for a mother who 6 years ago was hopeless and at the mercy of others. With an MRVP, I became stably housed, and I was able to address the heavy burdens of trauma and depression. With an MRVP in place, I can really focus on completing and furthering my education and be more civic-minded and fully engaged in promoting equity in housing. I strongly believe that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts recognizes that housing is a human right, and each person is worthy of opportunity and hope. With MRVP in place, it will give that 335,000 plus households hope for a life where possibilities are limitless. I ask that you support MRVP because you have the power. You have the power to make hope become reality. Families and providers, I would like you to spread the message that MRVP is hope. spread the message of hope through housing like wildfire. Thank you.
I think this is the part where I drop the mic and walk away. Thank you very much, Michelle. I really appreciate it. Reverend Merlin DeRozier is the director of the Everett Haitian Community Center, a community-based organization that Metro Housing works closely with, and our next speaker.
Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this group as you share this very important report. And thank you to everyone for being here this morning. My name is Merlande Desrosiers. I serve as associate pastor at the Covenant Church of Cambridge and director at EHCC, the Everett Haitian Community Center, and also the ethnic radio program, Radio Tele Commonwealth, on providing information to our ethnic community. We have heard so much about the impact of insecure, unstable housing. And we can go on and on and on. They're real. It's real. But what I would like to do today, I just forget my note at this point. What I would like to do right now is to share with you, as community providers, what we see firsthand as positive impact of MRVP. It's the hope that it brings to a young boy, a young student in Everett Public School at the height of the pandemic, just came from Haiti to live with his siblings and his single mother who died of COVID and now had to think of how they're going to continue to pay the rent that their mom was paying. Working after school at a pizza shop. And coming to the center and applying, and we say, no, there's none available anymore, but we'll try someday, you probably will get it. But had to provide other support, emergency support to them. That's the impact. It's about Brianna, the 12-year-old girl, the Kiara, 8-year-old girl, living with a hard-working, front-line worker, single mom, working at $15 per hour, living in a city where a 2-bedroom apartment costs between $2,100 to $3,000 basic. And could use this. Hopeful. The great impact also, but is about the young, the old, senior citizen, please strike old, vibrant senior citizen, Italian American, home occupant landlord, low-income landlord. Still after 40 years in the United States with a strong Italian accent, but use MRVP for his new disabled Brazilian mom and work with organizations as a landlord to help that woman get the assistance needed, her paperwork for MRVP in order to remain in her apartment that he rents to them. And it's about the investment, looking at MRVP as an investment to a single mom who, because of that assistance, was able to move to a better neighborhood because that was her choice. Her daughter to go to a better school and now graduate from high school, now in college. And her son to be able to participate in a football club. And after several years using MRVP, saved a little bit of money, used the support from her local organization, and now a proud, though low income, home owner. And lastly, the impact of MRVP is the hope that as organizations we try and leaders try to give to a young family of 2 kids who are working, 2 parents who are working, hoping to get MRVP so that their children can be able to live in an apartment, perhaps, where there's a little patio where they can play, as opposed to sitting in front of the TV or playing video games. That's their hope. We can say that the impact that we've seen, especially on mental health. So as community organizations, as churches, we are also impacted. We see the pain, we see the anxiety, we see the stress. And when that happens, when people get the support, we are happy to see them healed. We're happy to see the relief. And so that also lifts a burden on us that have the responsibility to support us. So yes, it's an investment also on us. Because we have that joy when we see them able to get the key. It's also a great impact in our neighborhoods. We're neighborhoods now who may have grown old and now see families come with children in the streets playing and bring much joy. It's an investment. Please do not look at MRVP as a commodity. And I'm so glad that today, as you have this report and you are here with us, it's December, the month of universal celebration of human rights. And we look for the day that each and every family who is eligible can get the right to MRVP. It's an investment for the Commonwealth. It's an investment for families, investment in love, investment in stability, an investment, as we say, for the young woman in her 40s who had been using MRVP for quite a long time and now is a homeowner, an investment for the economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Keith Ferry, who is the Executive Director of Wayfinders in Springfield, Massachusetts.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. So I came a long way today, and I came a long way because of the importance of this opportunity that is before us. I came here also speaking not only as the head of my organization, Wayfinders, and I'll tell you a little bit about that organization in a moment. I came here as a member of the Regional Housing Network, a co-chair that with my colleague in arms here, Rob Corley, from NeighborWorks Housing Solutions, and I come here as a board member of CHAPA, and I come here as someone who is dedicated my life to addressing opportunity, to advancing economic mobility and housing stability in the neighborhoods and communities in which I've worked. A little bit about Wayfinders. Yes, we're based in Springfield, but we're a regional organization serving Western Massachusetts and focused really on the Pioneer Valley there, working to build and advocate for a thriving and equitable region by improving the housing stability and economic mobility for families and individuals, and developing and managing a wide range of housing to support strong communities. So that's the means and the ends that we're working toward at Wayfinders. Through our work as a member of the Regional Housing Network and as an administrator, we administer MRVP in our region. But today I'm here to talk to you not as an administrator of the program, but as a developer of affordable housing as well, and also with a Western Massachusetts perspective. Be really clear and straightforward. It's already been said, MRVP is an essential tool in advancing housing stability, not just for families, but to spur the housing development that's needed for those families as well. MRVP today assigned a specific housing development project to help developers like us include more affordable apartments while being able to count on standards of rent that we need to operate. When we use MRVP in a project, it enables us to set aside rental apartments for extremely low-income families. Families like you've heard described today, who are looking for a foothold, a platform from which to build toward the future. Importantly, that rental subsidy through MRVP improves for us as a developer and owner the project's cash flow, meaning we have money to pay the bills. It helps us pay for our operations, maintenance, and our debt service. Without this project-specific support from MRVP today, it would be financially infeasible for us to provide this kind of housing. Infeasible. And while we are producing some housing with the current system, we are far from short of meeting the affordability and attainability required for all families in need in the Commonwealth. And I say in the Commonwealth, again, I'm from Western Massachusetts. People think of Western Massachusetts, you think of a lot of things. Some people think of affordability. It's much cheaper out there, right? That's because you're thinking with your Eastern Massachusetts paycheck. But to be really serious about that, putting on my Western Massachusetts hats, a few fun facts from well outside 495. We did a housing study last year with the UMass Donahue Institute. And we looked at affordability very deeply as we see it coming through our door every day with many people challenges increasing every day. And we did a look at sort of affordability and the need for low-cost rental apartments in our region. 17,000 needed to meet the needs of low-income households who are challenged with finding housing in the Pioneer Valley. This need results from a housing mismatch between what people can afford and the rent they must pay. During the pandemic, our rents never dipped. There was nobody moving out. Our rents actually increased, and they've continued to steadily increase. And as already has been described, when families have this situation where they're in unaffordable situations, and this housing mismatch is something that comes home to roost every day for them, it pushes them to make toxic trade-offs that can impact the life outcomes for all family members. Again, we can only develop this type of housing at scale with the support of expanded MRVP. Often, again, as what people think about it, you think about affordability, but unfortunately, let me give you a few more data points about Western Mass. We don't have it. And you talk about racial justice, I appreciate Evan pointing that out here. Let me first talk about who are the renters in our region. 70% of renters in our region are Black and Latinx families. Only 30% of white households are renters in our region. So we are able to help renters in our region. We're going to have the disproportionate and needed impact on the low-income families in our region, the families of color who cannot afford the rent today in many cases. How do we know they can't afford it? We know that 54% of renters in our region are paying more than 30% of their income on their housing costs. And 1 in 4 renters are paying more than 50% of their income for their rent. These were the numbers before the pandemic, by the way. It's only gotten worse and more challenging in our region. So, as we think about additional evidence from what we see in the work that we do, we have many housing developments across the region, in rural and urban, in gateway cities. They all have hundreds of people on the waiting list for those subsidized affordable apartments. The same type of families who are looking would benefit from an MRVP voucher. In fact, our most recently opened project in Holyoke, 38 apartments, beautiful apartments, right across the street from the recently renovated Holyoke Public Library in a resurgent neighborhood. 38 units, 1,500 applicants for our lottery. So all of this underscores how critical it is to have MRVP as a resource to support families in accessing and maintaining housing at a cost that they can afford, and helping developers like us advance projects to create more affordable apartments that families and individuals so badly need across the Commonwealth. As such, we support expanding MRVP and the proposal to make it a universal benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Our next speaker is Matthew Pike, who is the Director of Policy and Programs with Mass Narrow.
Good morning. Okay, so let's just deal with the obvious question. What's narrow? So it's the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, where we represent the Massachusetts chapter. The Massachusetts chapter represents 242 local housing authorities that represent and then serve 43,000 public housing residents. 43,000 units for 70,000 residents. I've been asked to talk about, and I love seeing this crowd, and it's so rare for me to get to stand up and see you all, and so it's so nice to be up here, but I've been asked to talk about the relationship between public housing and the MRVP proposal. So more formally, along with our Executive Director, Donna Braun-Rigo, who couldn't be here today, I want to thank our partners, CHAPA, Metro West Boston, Housing Boston, and of course the Boston Foundation. It's such a privilege to be here. But our state's public housing portfolio operates in the face of chronic underinvestment, insufficient to address both annual operating costs as well as the capital needs for preservation and modernization of these homes. Most of our state's public housing was built between the late 60s and the early 80s, and Mass Narrow now estimates that there is probably a $5 billion deficit to preserve and modernize these residences. Now here's the key, nearly 70% of those who call public housing their home are seniors. So, this history of underfunding disproportionately impacts those who have earned the right to a safe, decent, and affordable place to live for the rest of their lives. The expansion of MRVP as proposed today works hand in hand with our state's public housing commitment. Both are desperately needed to begin to address the housing affordability crisis that we face here in Massachusetts. Because while we must see dramatic increases in funding to support our public housing, there simply is not enough public housing to meet the need for those seniors, our veterans, and families in need. Mass Narrow, along with our partners here today, is thrilled to support this proposal to expand MRVP, not just because it is based on a recognition of a universal right to housing as a human right, but because it forms a critical part of a three-pronged strategy. First, to dramatically increase support for the operations, preservation, and modernization of our public housing infrastructure. Second, to seek added funding for the development of new homes, just as Keith talked about, in the pipeline to help address the supply problem. And finally, whether adopted incrementally, and Evan's suggestion, of course, in his whole presentation was brilliant, but whether incrementally, 25,000 at a time, or something more ambitious, we want to see an increase in MRVP to provide greater long-term housing stability to everyone who needs rental assistance, and by doing so, spurring on greater landlord participation, development of new units and new homes for those desperately in need, because that's the point, and that's what brings us all here, and this remains our driving passion. And finally, we believe this will open up the opportunity for those most vulnerable, those most in need to find a home, both in our state's public housing system and elsewhere.
Thanks, Matt. Metro Housing has had the privilege of being supported by and working with the Boston Foundation since our founding 40 years ago, 1983. And our next speaker is Keith Mahoney, who is the Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs at TBF.
Thank you. Next and last speaker. So, last week I was at a housing roundtable with Governor Baker, and some of you were there as well. And it was actually a celebration of a public policy win with Housing Choice. That felt really good, and we haven't had a lot of that for those who have been working public policy on housing over the last decade. So let's remember that feeling and hope that there's more. Because while that was an important step, it was a very first step. And housing policies of all shapes and sizes are needed to solve the housing crisis in Massachusetts. An expansion of a proven, effective strategy like MRVP enables households to live in the communities of their choice. And as Michelle and the Reverend so powerfully said, it gives them hope. With nearly half of Black families and 56% of Latino families in Massachusetts eligible for rental assistance, MRVP is a powerful tool against displacement, especially for households of color facing economic pressures. The Boston Foundation is honored to amplify this research and contribute to the emerging campaign in collaboration with all of you. This campaign stands on the shoulders of decades of advocacy to expand MRVP. We look forward to reinvigorating that campaign with new and familiar faces. We're gonna have a campaign launch event on January 30th, hosted at our offices at the Boston Foundation and on Zoom. For more information, please see Helen Murphy. Helen, will you stand up and wave to everyone? Helen does great work in our housing portfolio at the foundation, so we hope you can join us there. Senator Keenan highlighted the attention and resources that education and transportation have gotten. And public policy often moves in cycles where different issues come to the fore and get greater attention and visibility and resources. I am optimistic that we can make this next session and these next few years the housing cycle, where we address this issue with deep commitment, with empathy, and with resources. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Evan, for an excellent report. Thank you to all the partners, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
That's it.